working with a template and prepared to trace it onto a flat slab and cut it out, but you know that you want to add texture to that piece, remember to grab the texture pieces, stamps or rollers, and add the texture to the clay before tracing the template onto the clay, because you're going to have to apply pressure to the slab. And if you cut out your shape first, when you apply the pressure to create the texture, you'll ruin the shape. So apply the texture, then use your template, trace around it, and cut it out. Especially if you're creating a figurative sculpture, keep in mind whether or not parts of it need to be hollow. So for instance, this figurative sculpture isn't very big and the torso is quite thin, and so it's all solid clay, and that would be fine. It doesn't need to be hollow. This sculpture, on the other hand, has a little bit more volume to it. It's a little bit larger, and so something like that would require a hollow interior. So we practice this in class. Remember to do that. You roll out a slab. It doesn't have to be very thick. And you get yourself a little bit of paper towel. Now how much paper towel you use depends on how big of a form you need to make. Scrunch it up into a ball or like an avocado shape. Kind of depends on what you're making. Like if it's a human torso, it would be more of a rectangular prism type shape. And set it in the middle of your slab, and then form the clay around it. Pinch off the clay that you don't need. Try to get all the air out of the interior. Push that damp paper towel in so that you can close up the clay, and then of course you just keep adding on to that in order to create the form that you actually need. When you're all done with the sculpture, you'll use a wooden skewer and you'll poke a hole somewhere inconspicuous into that hollow form, and that will allow the paper to burn out and the smoke and water to escape. Okay? Now you might need to do that for pieces like heads also, but definitely torsos. But again, keep in mind on what size it's going to be. You're likely to have some excess clay at your work area while you're working on your sculpture. Remember to keep it covered with damp paper towel while you're not working with it, and it won't dry out on you as fast. Remember that when you're joining two pieces of clay, you need to score with the metal rib both surfaces that will come into contact with one another. Give it a good score, scratch it up. And also apply some slip to one of the surfaces is sufficient. And then you can assemble your sculpture or join the two pieces. If you're making some sort of a three-dimensional prism type structure from many flat faces, remember that we've got this tool which there's several of these, just pieces of aluminum. You can pick them up by the sink where all the slip is and all the sculpting tools. And they work really well to create that 45-degree bevel cut. So you can just push down and do the bevel cut so that when the time comes to join your pieces, those edges are going to go together really well. Just make sure you bevel the right edge. I think I just made a boo-boo on mine. Okay, so, and then of course that's where you would do the scoring, is on those beveled edges. And you would add the slip. Don't forget about that. Add the slip. And then those beveled edges would join together. When the time comes to put your sculpture away for the day and store it until next class, how you do so depends on what kind of pieces you need to store. If you have several flat slab pieces, then it works well to store them on one of these white plastic trays, which you can grab at the back of the room. They're just the acrylic paint trays. They're by the sink at the back of the room. There's several loose rolls of paper towel kicking around the classroom, or you can find them underneath on the bottom shelf underneath where the texture stamps usually stay. Here's the texture stamps there. There's a bunch of paper towel there at the bottom shelf. You can see that. But these rolls work well because you can quickly create a nice bedding, which is exactly what you need to do. So take a long piece and then make a nice thick mattress for your pieces on that white plastic tray. And then we don't want to soak the paper towel excessively. We just want it to be damp. Now, when you put your flat pieces on that damp paper towel, stack them up as best you can, because they will help keep each other hydrated, or at least put them very close together. When you're finished with that, get another long piece of paper towel and then do the same, but this time you're making like a blanket. So we want to cover up those slab pieces. And then same thing, you don't need to soak the paper towel, just nice and damp. And then that's going to go in a plastic bag. Now, where are the plastic bags? I'll just show you how that goes in first. And shove it right into the plastic bag. And then don't worry about taping it or tying a knot or anything. Just fold it under. And then that's going to go on either a shelf in the kiln room, or if you're a design study student, you're going to take your sculpture and store it in 2303 on some shelves that have been put up. But make sure that the loose end of the bag is tucked underneath the tray, so that when you put the tray down, that loose end stays underneath. Now, where do we get the bags from? Bags are in the back room, just right around the left corner, right there in the blue recycle bin. Now, when you take a bag, you'll probably notice that there's some old names on it. If you can get the old name tag off without tearing the bag, then do so, but don't attempt it if the name tag is really stuck on and it's not coming off. We don't want any holes in the bag. All you have to do is take maybe 3 pieces of masking tape and just cover up the old name. And then use a Sharpie to add your name to the bag. You'll find the Sharpies and the masking tape here by the pencil sharpener. If you have a figurative sculpture, or perhaps your sculpture is already standing up and it's not flat and you don't have a whole bunch of flat pieces to store, then if possible, and it might not be possible because the interior of your sculpture might not be accessible. Let's say it is, say it's like a cylinder form like this. Then you can help keep it hydrated by putting some damp paper towel use the spray bottle on the inside of the sculpture. But again, don't worry about it if your sculpture is enclosed and you can't access the inside. That's fine. Because the most important thing is that you find yourself a roll of paper towel, take off quite a bit, and then wrap the sculpture like it's a mummy with a bunch of paper towel. Try to wrap it thoroughly so that there are no exposed pieces of clay. And then, make sure you get the top. Then when you're all done, not soaking wet, but just damp. If it's a weekend coming up, I suppose you could be a little bit more generous. Then you take the bag that you've retrieved, and you don't need a white tray this time. You take your sculpture and you put it right in the bag like that, and then roll the bag, get all the air out of the bag and roll the bag around the sculpture. You don't need to tape it closed or tie a knot, because you're just gonna put it down on the shelf, wherever you're storing it. And if you push your sculpture up against, say, another sculpture, or the wall or something like that, then the bag will stay closed and the air will not get into the bag and the moisture will not evaporate out of the bag. Make sure your name is visible though, so that you add a piece of masking tape and put your name on the bag and make sure it's visible. At the beginning of class, when you retrieve your stored sculpture and you take it out of the bag, whether you have flat pieces or you have a tall sculpture already, do not throw away the damp towel. Keep it for the end of class and then use it to rewrap your sculpture. And you may or may not have to add more water. Most likely you have to add a little bit more water, but keep reusing that damp paper towel.